This is one of the finest collections of Chinese antiques and porcelain in the world. It's owned by a New Yorker who deals in reproductions, Mildred Motaheda.
Look at the difference between the detail here on this, the January sample, versus the one that we got in March.
Well, it means they've used another girl. That's what it means. And what
It's more than that, though, because, look, here are the comments that from the Winterthur Museum regarding these, because they sent us a whole set of Polaroids comparing the antique here, the January one there, and the March one there.
The replicas she sells are based on her collection. Until recently, they were all made in Europe. Now, she and her business director, Charles Donahue, are experimenting with production in China.
But we'll get it as close as we can. They have to just curl the hand up more and move that back, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and no antiquing here. This is disgusting. This is all fake nonsense. And down
see
here...
how the detail that Maria did on this coat and things versus this.
Yes.
It's just...
Well, but remember, we trained Maria for 38 years and brought her the originals. Now, these people are
The
just...
Chinese have been making...
I know, but
porcelain
they
longer
have not
than
made
that.
this for 200 years.
Yeah. Okay,
So-
we've got about 7 different items, changes that we have to make on these.
The factory where the replicas are made is part of an agricultural commune near Peking. This film is the first record of any kind that foreigners have been allowed to make of porcelain manufacturing since 1706, when secrets taken from China were adopted by Europeans. It's ironic that the Chinese are now having to relearn these same arts from the West.
另外呢，咱们这个花儿和他这要求不一样啊，好像是咱们这手啊呼的这个高一点，他那手呢好像还不像这么粗大。
Look at this. Make the thickness in the clay. But you know, we have never had distortion in this.
Business meetings in China tend to be very informal, and nobody ever hurries.
And the colors, certainly you can do the colors better. Look.
Actually, Mildred, if they fit in the front, it's in the back. They're too wide. He's at least a half
Look
an
at the
inch.
painting of these feathers. And look at the painting of those feathers. If you hold that, Mr. Chang, look. That's not well defined. Too much heavy glaze. Thinner glaze. This is the one we said.
The Chinese are beginning to learn something of Western business practice. But foreign businessmen complain that decisions are made too slowly and that individuals refuse to take responsibility for decisions for fear of being singled out for criticism.
And, you know, I think you should try and do it because I think it would be a good item for you for a long, long time.
We can sell all of them that you can make.
But you also have to be able to do it without a lot of rejects or it's going to be too expensive. So it's a compromise.
The selling price has become important to units like this, as they're now free to keep much of what they earn. So when the discussions about quality are completed, Charles, Mr. Chen from the Arts and Crafts Department, and Motaheda's overseas Chinese agent get down to the
It
bargaining.
is somewhat in the tradition that Mrs. Motaheda was talking to you about. But again, our volume that we can take from you really depends on price. This is beautiful. We can sell it. The lower the price, the more we'll sell. And we've gone through this. It's taken us 3 years.
Price is bargain price.
All right.
Bargain, yeah.
So
That's good.
The price we offer you is what we can afford to sell it.
Well,
That's the most important.
I think we have to ask the factory, do you want a large volume of this? That's one price. If you don't want a large volume, maybe then the price would be higher. But if you want a big volume, then we have to bargain on price.
这 price 啊，这个
Okay.
原先的 price 你让他放心好。
You don't have to worry about it. He said the price should be right.
Okay.
We have full confidence in you. But there's always a point. whether
Well-
we can afford it or not.
Very good. We'll finalize it tomorrow then.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Everything has to be finalized tomorrow
Okay.
about price-wise. And it will be, that according to him, be bottom price, but all depends.
The lunch break is over at this commune just outside Canton. Most of the people who live here are the children and grandchildren of overseas Chinese who've returned and settled since the revolution. Until recently, this was just an agricultural commune. Agriculture is still important, but the commune now has its own container factory. The plant is a joint venture between a Hong Kong-based company and China. It's designed to produce 10,000 containers a year for sale largely to the US market. George Ling, the man behind the project, is taken on regular inspections of the factory by the commune leader. He was born in China, but left when he was 17 to study in the United States and Great Britain. He returned to China with his wife during the Cultural Revolution. The social experiment he'd longed to be part of went sour. So he moved to Hong Kong, where he set up as an architect. He was persuaded to go back to China to do business. This is his first venture.
In 1978, China began to have this open door policy. People began to approach us because we have known, so to speak, both worlds. We could provide a kind of bridge that was necessary, and doing business was a very natural thing at that time. There was opportunity, so we did. Remember, when we started this thing, China was just beginning to open up and beginning in this new program of modernization. So a lot of things were new. Start shipping the steel frame for this building. They were much larger than the port could handle at that time. And also, like in any other industrial society, you have the infrastructure to support a plant like this. Now, we need a screw or need a bolt, we have to go to Hong Kong, unless we have everything planned. Now, of course, gradually, they begin to build this infrastructure now.
So far, the plant has not been profitable. In fact, George Ling has been close to losing $2.5 million on it. One of his first problems was persuading the commune to cut production when the market for containers collapsed. They were actually producing more than the factory's theoretical capacity, as they were used to the government buying whatever was made.
They wanted us to buy containers continually, irrespective of the market. Then, when they began to see that company after company go bankrupt and see the figures of the shipping lines only shipping 50% capacity, they began to realize the seriousness of that. Some of the criticism that the foreign businessmen have in China is because of this lack of understanding of Chinese way of doing things, and also partly because the Chinese at that time didn't have the corporation laws, the tax laws, the whole legal infrastructure there. As a Chinese, I think, even though the situation is not that clear, there's a trust between the overseas Chinese and the Chinese government. So a lot of things are unwritten. So our contract is about that thick, you know, very thin compared to a contract signed elsewhere for similar kind of projects.
George's company has some advantages when dealing with China. He speaks the language and knows the culture. But just like Western traders, he's had to cope with Chinese suspicions of capitalists. He feels the Chinese have been victims of their own propaganda.
When they started to open up and trying to do some of the things that so the ways the West do business, they think they only have to concentrate on money and profit making, and that's very unfortunate. they tend to neglect that throughout the history of capitalism, there was a lot of regulations and rules developed, what the business world called business ethics. And actually, those are rules of the games that is developed, without which you can't even play the game.
George Ling is just one of the hundreds of thousands of Chinese who came to Hong Kong to create one of the most vigorous cities in the world. Ceded to the British after the Opium Wars, it has grown from a small station for refitting British ships to an ostentatious example of unfettered capitalism. Some Western commentators see Hong Kong's material prosperity as a vindication of the free enterprise system. With the economic success has come an obsession with materialism. While the Chinese authorities won't want to adopt all that Hong Kong has to offer, just across the border they're experimenting with their own version of capitalism.
The tranquility and gentle pace of life in the small fishing port of Sherkou was roughly broken in 1979 when the Chinese government designated it one of 4 special economic zones. The zones are designed to attract foreign capital and technology, but also to restrict the contaminating influence of foreigners to a few small areas on China's fringe. At the largest of these zones, Shenzhen, the atmosphere is like that of a gold rush town. Nothing seems complete, nothing permanent. Everywhere buildings are going up, roads are being built, sewers being laid. What attracts foreign investment is a plentiful supply of cheap labor, low-priced factory space, low taxes, and the fact that profits can be taken out. However, to prevent foreign control of these zones, the government has adopted a policy of joint ownership, sharing the management and the profits. Take this factory. The money to buy the milk packing equipment comes from Hong Kong, part of a $4.5 million joint venture. The commune that runs the associated farm used some of the money to buy over 1,000 top pedigree cows from New Zealand. It's all part of China's efforts to acquire the most up-to-date. They have new technology on the farm and in the factory, and they earn a small return on the milk they sell to Hong Kong. By 1985, they expect to supply all of Hong Kong's milk. Joint ventures like this help tie Hong Kong and China more closely together, and also ensure that China doesn't give up her sovereignty to overseas businessmen, even if they're Chinese. Even international corporations are willing to accept the idea of joint management because they view the Chinese market as a potential crock of gold. But they all face problems when starting up. The women who work here are largely unfamiliar with modern factory life. Many were often unskilled farmhands. They may be paid more in these special zones, but they have to accept far more rigid work routines than they're used to. They've had to discard the idea of the iron rice bowl, guaranteed work and meals, and idle workers can even be fired. Television training has been introduced by this company to help new employees acclimatize to factory life. By and large, Western working practices have been accepted by the authorities, though it's a slower process to get workers to adopt them.
首先呢，在饮料的收藏。
Trade brings new industries, new technology, and new working conditions. It's also begun to change social habits.
Fast food has reached Shenzhen.
The layout of the restaurant would be familiar in many European or American high streets. Workers with only an hour for lunch and often away from their family now eat out. They want fast service. Paper cups and plastic spoons have taken the place of china and chopsticks. There aren't many restaurants like this in the country, but its presence pinpoints the dilemma the country faces in opening its doors to the West. Its very popularity symbolizes the threat to the traditional way of doing things in China.
It's not only foreigners who are experimenting with private enterprise in China.
Li Xiaoyan is 22 years old. She lives with her family in a small apartment in Canton. For 3 years she was out of work and stayed home to help her mother. Today her mother helps her. A high school graduate, she failed to get into university. But with 10,000 applicants for every place, that's not surprising. Now she has a stall in the local free market. During the Cultural Revolution, markets were banned. In 1979, there was a major change in policy, and free markets, where stallholders traded on their own behalf, were again allowed.
首先方便咗群眾購買啦，因為佢國營商店，我哋而家啲個體戶可以補充咗國營商店或者國家嗰啲有啲漏缺嘅地方，我哋可以補缺咗。二來咧咁樣咧，我哋咧咁樣嘅個體戶咧就比較靈活啊嘛，就方便咗群眾。有時我哋可以，有時有啲嘢咧，我哋可以平啲買都可以嘅咁樣，即係冇話受死一個價額嗰個金額嘅限制咁樣。咁啊另一方面咧，就而家我哋待業青年比較多啊，咁樣係可以解決咗就業嘅問題，咁而且亦都減輕咗國家嘅負擔咯。
Li Xiaoyan was just one of the 25 million unemployed before the free markets were set up. It said they've absorbed several million jobless. They've also given opportunities for stall holders to make a reasonable living, and in this market for customers to buy products that are not available elsewhere. But Canton is not China. The young here are not typical of all the youth in China. They may, however, be trendsetters.
Li Xiaoyan tries to satisfy the new tastes of Cantonese youth. She studies magazines, looks at what visitors from Hong Kong wear and at what her competitors are selling. But why did she choose this work?
點解要去呢樣工作？即係覺得佢比較乾手淨腳啦，唔使話擔憂佢話縮啊臭啊咁樣，起碼我今年賣唔晒，可以明年賣，就咁樣，最多係蝕本嘅啫，或者甚至講得好彩啲嚟講咧，就賺頭蝕尾啦。
During the day, Miss Li leaves her stall in the hands of a sister or cousin, while she takes material to be made up and collects completed clothes from friends and relatives who help out. Miss Li doesn't like to refer to her assistants as employees, even though it's now legal to employ up to 4 people.
搞掂啦，搞掂啦，頭先辛苦啦。
俾翻意思。即11件啦，連埋呢件。
11件。你幾時聽日最好俾到我？
聽日。好啊好啊。
我俾翻啲錢你先。
聽日可能要晚上喎。 因為你呢度未有得俾我嘛。
你聽日俾咩？我俾翻錢。10件即係4蚊係嘛？唔該晒喎。
多謝喎。多謝啊。咁我車埋呢幾件。
哦，你今晚過嚟？
我今晚又嚟攞埋啦。
好先。得閒過嚟。哦。
By day she sells clothes, at night she makes them. It's only when demand is high that she's forced to put out work. Now she's successful, but she had difficulties at the start.
好似資金方面啊，咁樣就係一個最大嘅困難啦。咁啊係父母支持嘅。首先出錢買一部機俾我哋咁樣做起，一部雜筆機咁樣。最初資金啊，分文都冇。
The picture is of Tsai Shen, the god of good fortune and money. Even with his presence, Miss Li does not expect to get rich quick. She makes a reasonable living, would be happy to make more, and does not want things to change.
有咁嘅感覺，即係覺得做生意咧，即係比較自由一啲，咁啊比較靈活一啲，就冇咁話上班啊落班啊咁樣冇話虧死咗，但係咧就好辛苦啊！8點鐘開始到晚上11點鐘到啦，即係左右咧，即係8點鐘左右到11點鐘左右啦，晚上。如果按自私啲嚟講咧，咁樣自己散漫慣咧，就都係想做生意嘅。雖然係辛苦啫，即係自己即係覺得比較自由一啲咁樣。即係如果返單位咧，就如果散漫慣一下返去咧，就覺得好似好唔習慣啊咁樣。
It's 8:30 a.m. This department store is already packed and will stay like this till it closes at 7. Most of the retailing in China is done through department stores. And because Chinese work 6 days a week, shops open for 7. Many of the products are way beyond their pockets. There's no hire purchase here, so people have to save long and hard to be able to afford things like this. A washing machine may cost as much as a year's wages. China is not yet a consumer society, but the refrigerator, the washing machine, and especially the television are available for those who can afford them. And even the Chinese are concerned to keep up with the Joneses. Most Chinese, even if they can afford to buy, are very careful with their money. They take the same care as though they were looking for the freshest food in the market. And it's no surprise. There are no guarantees. If you get a faulty product, it's hard luck. The Chinese are faced with a dilemma. They want Western know-how, technology and investment, but they're not sure whether they want all the values that seem to go with them. In the past, the Chinese have absorbed foreign influences while preserving their essential Chineseness. Today they fear this may not be possible. At the moment, if values are under attack, it's in the towns and cities, not in the countryside. And it's here where most of China's population, over 800 million people, live and work. Is the fear of westernization unjustified then? Wherever you go in rural China, there are signs of economic change. But as yet, few signs of the West. For centuries, the peasants have been isolated from outside influences. Are they now going to exchange new values for old? In the end, it is whether these people's outlook is changed and how far
That'll be the real measure of the impact of Western trade on China.
A decade after they opened the door, the Chinese leadership is still trying to figure out how to have the technology and know-how of the West without having the ideas of the West. Is there a way out of this dilemma? Joining me is Professor Margaret Pearson. What do you think?
No, I think there's essentially no way out of this dilemma. And it's ironic that the Chinese have faced this dilemma before in the late 19th century when they were trying to incorporate some Western technology and not bring in the underlying Western values. In that case, they stopped short the reform rather than bring forth many Western norms and values. Today, the situation is essentially the same. They cannot, for example, incorporate Western or Japanese management techniques without bringing in the underlying assumptions about labor relations and about production. So I think that there is no way out of this dilemma. Either the Chinese are going to have to take the whole package or essentially leave the reforms to flail.
Thanks very much. In the view of the Chinese leadership, among those most susceptible to Western influences have been artists and intellectuals. In our next program, we'll take a look at Chinese painters, writers, and musicians, and we'll talk about the dilemma of the intellectual in contemporary China.